I'm Emily Rooney. Welcome to Beat the Press. Our topics. The mainstream press loves to quote the Reverend Eugene Rivers, but some say the time has come to cut him off. Local cable outlet NECN makes big changes to its lineup with a focus on more news. And the New York Times public editor says the paper too often dismisses the work of other journalists. Plus, our media rants and raves of the week. Joining me are Dan Kennedy of Northeastern University, WGBH's Kelly Crossley, Kara Miller, also of WGBH, and former ABC correspondent TJ Winnick. First, he's provocative, he's outspoken, and that has made Reverend Eugene Rivers a media darling. But now some are accusing the media of giving him a platform he doesn't deserve.
For decades, the Reverend Eugene Rivers has been one of the media's go-to black voices.
Black people are no longer the minority du jour, the oppressed group du jour.
And this recent Boston Herald was a Rivers classic, from the dramatic cover pose to the claim that Boston's African-American community defeated itself in the city's mayoral race. But this time, Rivers' penchant for provocation backfired. The Boston Globe's Adrian Walker revealed that despite chiding Boston's black voters, Rivers himself hasn't voted since at least 1996, prompting this on-camera mea culpa.
I guess the term I have been remiss. How's that?
For some, not good enough. After Walker's scoop, Dorchester reporter-publisher Bill Forey urged the media to stop giving Rivers a platform, calling him a fraud and a hypocrite. Whether the media will heed that advice remains to be seen. Rivers has rebounded from bad PR before, including these incendiary remarks on WGBH about Boston's Cape Verdean community.
Where are the men? You got all those bars up and down Dudley Street where these guys hanging out, sipping beer, telling lies, talking about the women they run around with, right? These guys need to be challenged.
This time, though, there's a clear disconnect between Rivers' rhetoric and his own behavior. Behavior, he says, is about to change.
I invite the Fox camera to join me on November 5th to make sure that I vote.
Stay tuned, or maybe just tune out.
That, of course, was Adam Riley. And we should say that Eugene Rivers is a regular contributor to Boston Public Radio with Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. And he's usually on Mondays. He was away this week, but he's coming back on a Monday to explain the situation. And they're going to, put his nose to the grinder on this. And we'll see. We may end up terminating the relationship with him. We may not. That remains to be seen. So I basically agree with everything that everybody said about Eugene Rivers. And I've said this before. When the last time we talked about it, Callie, I said I like him, and it's true. And I think one of the problems is that he's likable and accessible in a way to the media, and it becomes maybe even a lazy go-to. And I'm totally confessing to that. On the other hand, I have to say I thought Bill Forey's editorial was over the top, and he did say he disclosed that his wife, Linda Dorsina Forey, ran, when she was running for the state Senate seat, that Eugene Rivers endorsed the other guy or whatever. And so there was some friction there anyway, but it wasn't enough. He shouldn't have been the one writing that editorial. It should have been somebody else completely. Same words, same sentiment, but it just shouldn't have been him. He has a clear conflict of interest, which you just can't throw away with a disclosure.
Yeah, Eugene Rivers is an interesting case. I profiled him for the Boston Phoenix in early 2001. At a time when he was starting to do some work with the then new George W. Bush administration. And it was interesting to go back and read that today, because what I was kind of remembering was that even then the question is, is Rivers just a shameless self-promoter, or is there real substance there? And it seemed that he's both. Yeah. He's a shameless self-promoter, and there's real substance there. And certainly his voting record shows that he is a bit of a hypocrite. Does that disqualify him from speaking out on public issues? I don't see why it would, but when you've been as outspoken about the need to go out and vote as he's been, it's probably more damaging to him than it would be to somebody else.
I mean, this season, he wrote in the Boston Herald that, the reason that the black vote was not represented, or rather that black candidates did not do as well as they could have, is because, what's wrong with people? There's not, minority communities are not getting out and voting. When I read that, in light of what we now know, that he has not voted since 1996, that he did not vote for Mel King, who he supported and actively supported, I think worked on the campaign of in the early 80s, I thought a little bit about Bob Livingston, who was forced to resign at the time of impeachment of Bill Clinton, because it's very hard when you rail against a certain kind of behavior, in that case having an extramarital affair, and then it turns out, oops, you were having an extramarital affair on the side. To what you were saying about the sort of ease and accessibility of Eugene Rivers, I think sometimes the media is looking for people to represent hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and I just think that whole instinct is wrong, and he's capitalized on that.
I agree with both of you. I remember I was a reporter for WBZ back in December of 2005, and 4 young men were tragically gunned down in the basement of a Dorchester home. It was a makeshift recording studio. And so all of us reporters were standing around at about 10 o'clock at night wondering who we were going to speak to, because we were knocking on doors and no one would speak to us. Sure enough, Eugene Rivers came and spoke quite eloquently about the heartbreak and the tragedy itself. So he was filling a leadership vacuum, if you will. And I think that in terms of why he's given so much airtime, I think it's probably the same reason that he hasn't voted in nearly 3 decades, apparently, laziness. And the media, whether it's the local media or whether it's the national media, as Kara mentioned, tend to want to find someone to speak for a large group of people. And it's just laziness why they don't go out and find someone else, because a shopkeeper in a community can be just as eloquent a spokesperson as a clergy member or a public servant.
Well, it is laziness. We've talked about it actually on this show. There was a study done about journalists and who they select over and over and over again to speak for somebody. It becomes particularly problematic, to Kara's point, when you pick someone to speak for a community and it is assumed that everything he says is on the money, is correct. There have been people in this community who have said for years, this man is not representing me or us. Will you please reach out to somebody else? No one's saying he can't be a voice if you want to have a voice, but he represents himself. The 3 things that he says that he has bona fides: black leadership, right? Community organizing, and also faith. I mean, if you find that in any of those arenas, and it can be found, that he is without credibility, then why is he on the air talking about and asked to speak about this? It's our fault as much as it is his fault. We sat on this panel not long ago, and I raised that this young woman who was talking about Syria as if she were an expert. And this is on a national stage. She was everywhere being quoted. Then she was outed as having no credibility. I find that that is something that finally comes out in some of these instances. But when it comes to communities of color, it is assumed there is one voice all the time, and that's it. And no matter what anybody else says to point to a lack of credibility, it's dismissed. I think we need an examination here about both that, how you evaluate people. And let me just say this. We live in the Boston and New England area. An embarrassment of riches, of all kinds of folks to talk to, not even just the shopkeeper in the community, but so many other people. If you're looking for a scholar, if you're looking for an academic, if you're looking for somebody who's knowledgeable. Let me give you a good example. John Barrows is now being treated as though he's the second coming in Boston. Guess what? I've talked to him many times before on Basic Black. Lots of people know he exists.
Yeah, we did.
I am not saying that he is not a perfect person to be asked. I'm saying there's more of him out there. And there's plenty of folk to be talked to, and that's what should be happening. And it's insulting, frankly, to have someone standing up saying, I'm representing this community, and whatever crazy thing comes out of my mouth, it's assumed to be correct. Journalists don't take that often for other people. Why should the black community particularly have to suffer that?
You're absolutely right. I do think that we should point out that Adrian Walker, a prominent African-American journalist, has been calling out Eugene Rivers for years from his very prominent position at the Globe. Rivers has offended people like Henry Louis Gates, Joan Wallace Benjamin. Those have been well-publicized disputes with a lot of people taking the side of Gates and Wallace Benjamin. So Rivers may have been given more credibility than he deserves, as you say, but the controversies he's been involved in have not gone unreported or unnoticed, I don't think.